Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Tanya O'Rourke. Tonight, the two candidates for Ohio's 1st Congressional District will square off. Let's bring them out now. Incumbent Republican Representative Steve Chabot and his Democratic challenger, Aftab Purval. And joining us on our panel tonight are three 9 on Your Side reporters, Paula Christian, Tom McKee, and Kristen Swilley. Let's give them a round of applause as well. To our audience, we thank you for coming. We ask that you stay silent and respectful throughout this debate, and please hold all your applause going forward until the very end so we can get as many questions in as possible. All right, gentlemen, here's how this is going to go. A panelist will ask a question. Each of you will have 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer that question, and we will alternate who answers first. After the second person speaks, the first will have a chance to have an optional 30-second rebuttal. But we will start tonight with opening statements. Each of you will have 2 minutes for your opening statements. Mr. Chabot, you won the coin toss, so it is yours to go first.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to WEC and to Channel 9 and to all of you who are here or watching at home this evening. You know, in our debate last week, my opponent talked robotically about the 22 years that I've had the honor to serve the people of this congressional district. We'll see if he does it again tonight. But 22 has always been a kind of a lucky number to me. I was born on January 22nd. My wife and I were engaged on July 22nd. We were married on June 22nd. And while I've had the privilege to serve you in this congressional district for that time, it raises a question, what's my opponent been doing? Well, he moved into our congressional district just 1 day before he announced he was running for Congress. That means he spent more time working for a Washington lobbying firm 4 years than he did actually living in our district. And it's not just any D.C. lobbying outfit. It's a firm that has represented some of the world's worst dictators and terrorists. Mr. Purval can claim that he didn't work for those terrorists directly, but he had no problem taking a big salary, knowing how the firm was making its money. With that type of experience, no wonder Aftab has found himself in some hot water over legal and ethical violations. His firing of employees in the clerk's office without cause and replacing them with his political buddies raises serious questions. Non-disclosure agreements, taxpayer dollars being used as hush money, campaign finance laws broken. It goes on, and it should sound alarms for every voter in this district. This behavior demonstrates who Aftab puts first. It's not you, it's him and his political ambition. I'm committed, as I always have been, to putting you first. I'm fighting for the taxpayer and small businesses, for jobs and security, for better, more affordable health care, and yes, for pre-existing condition coverage. That's why I've been named the most effective congressman from Ohio and the 7th most effective Republican out of 230 Republicans in Congress. And Citizens Against Government Waste found me to be in the top 5 year after year for saving taxpayer dollars. We're going to continue to work for folks, and thank you for listening this evening.
Mr. Purval.
Thank you so much for having us here today. Thank you to WCPO. Thank you to WEC. Thank you to those of you at home and here in the theater. Unfortunately, what we just heard from Congressman Chabot is more of the same. Over-the-top, unrelenting negativity. He's been in Congress for a very long time. You would think he'd be running a campaign based on his track record or what he wants to do into the future. But unfortunately, his opening statement is characterized by misleading facts about outright lies and personal smears. I think we can do better. I want to introduce myself to all of you. My name's Aftab Purval, and I'm running for Congress because I think we need new leadership to take on the challenges that we face. I was born right here in Ohio, went to Ohio State, then to the University of Cincinnati College of Law, where I worked at the Legal Aid Domestic Violence Clinic representing battered women who couldn't afford an attorney. I've served as a federal prosecutor and as an attorney here for Procter & Gamble. And in 2016, thanks to the great people of Hamilton County, I was elected your clerk of courts. In my time there, we cut waste, we reduced the size of government, and we saved taxpayers nearly $1 million. That's the kind of common sense work of bringing people together to get results that I want to bring to Washington. We've got to end the dysfunction, the negativity that Mr. Chabot's campaign and his opening statement has been characterized in D.C., we have to start representing people better. We have to serve them. I want to run for office because I want to fight for your health care, provide good jobs, and invest in critical infrastructure like the Western Hills Viaduct. I'm looking forward to tonight talking about the issues that matter most and how we can move together as a country for all of us and not just some of us. Thank you.
Okay, so let's begin the conversation. Paula Christian, you have the first question.
An appeals court this week denied a motion to delay the Ohio Elections Commission hearing on your campaign spending. If the commission determines there is a campaign spending violation, do you believe you can still serve in Congress?
Thank you for the question and the opportunity. It's important to understand that a majority of the complaints filed against my campaign have been dismissed as utterly baseless. There is one issue that is pending that's minor in regards to a poll that we took in the beginning of the year to determine whether a congressional campaign made sense or whether I should stay put at the clerk of court's office. We asked the experts, our lawyers, how do we pay for it? They told us to pay for it partly out of our local account and partly out of our federal account. And that's exactly what we did because we're trying to stay true to the letter and the spirit of the law. Now, this issue is being litigated. And if it turns out that we were incorrect, then we'll remedy the situation immediately. But I truly believe I'm the best person to represent the people of the 1st Congressional District in the United States Congress because I have a track record. I've made promises and I've completed those promises of reducing the size of government, of cutting waste, and of saving taxpayer dollars. When compared with Mr. Shabbat's record, my record really stands out. He's been in Congress for a very long time, and we have very little to show for it. But what's worse is he spent his time there putting special interests before the people of the 1st District on health care, on infrastructure, on the economy, on so many jobs, and on so many issues that are important to the people of the 1st District.
Mr. Shabbat?
It's just not accurate, much of what he just said. And I think it's interesting. There were actually 2 articles in the Enquirer today, one in the hard copy this morning and one online this afternoon. The one this morning was what the reporter indicated there, and it specifically says, court denies attempt by Pureval to halt hearing. And what that's all about is he has serious charges against him, one for which he could be fined or go to jail. And what he's been trying to do is put this off. He's lawyered up now. He's got 3 different law firms representing him on these charges. And he's trying to put them off till after the election so that the public won't know what the result of this is till after the election. That's what I would encourage folks to read that. The other thing that happened, and this will probably be in the paper tomorrow because it was online today, something happened last Saturday. We were out in Harrison, which is part of our district. We had a bunch of volunteers out there. And they were going to go door to door for myself and some other candidates. And this one young person comes up to me, he had a Shabbat shirt on, and says that he wanted to talk about the debate. What was my, what I think about last time, what I think about AFTAB, what I think was effective, what was my strategy for the next debate, and those kinds of questions, peppering me with questions. And I didn't think a whole lot of it at the time, but afterwards, he left. It turns out he's got an FTAB bumper sticker on. We tracked him down. He works for the FTAB campaign, so they're trying to get advantages, even in a debate like this. I've run against a lot of people over the years, some good people with records a heck of a lot better than him, and I've never had a sleazier campaign against me than this one.
Okay, Mr. Pureval, you can
I'm shocked to hear that Mr. Shabbat believes that this is a sleazy campaign because this campaign started with his campaign parking a volunteer outside of my former home and literally stalking my fiance and now wife, sending campaign operatives to our campaign events to try and disrupt them, trying to intimidate my campaign manager and other campaign staff and our own office. Guys, this is the cynical, negative politics that we just absolutely have to get past. We have to start bringing people together and driving results of the 1st District. Mr. Shabbat's had his chance, and he's just failed us.
Thank you very much. Tom McKee has the second question.
Yes, gentlemen. The U.S. has imposed tariffs on many countries to try and correct what's seen as a trade imbalance, and many of those tariffs affect companies right in the 1st District. Tell me a specific encounter you've had with a business in the 1st District that is concerned about being less competitive or being unfairly treated with these tariffs, and what you've counseled them to do to stay competitive and earn money.
Yeah, Standard Textile is an example of a business that we've talked to and how it was going to harm their business and a whole lot of their employees, and that's right here in our area. And I am one who tends to be a free trader. This is one where I've disagreed with our president on. He tends to think that we don't need regional trade deals, that we need to have trade deals with specific countries. And as it's turned out, he may just be right on that. He's been right on a lot of things. And I hope he's right on this one, too, because that's the policy that's moving forward. We have had a big problem with countries like China, for example, which we make it very easy for them to get their products into our country, but it's a whole lot harder to get our products into their country. And if a business wants to go in there, they have to partner up with them, and oftentimes the Chinese are stealing their intellectual property. So we need to be much tougher and much more aggressive with countries like China. I happen to be on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm very involved in trade and have been for many years now. And the jobs of the future are involved in trade. A lot of our major companies here that a lot of people are employed by are trade, whether it's GE Aviation, whether it's Procter & Gamble. There's a whole range of companies, and small business. I also happen to be chairman of the House Small Business Committee. And I like to say that there's about 95% or so of the world's population, the consumers out here, who live outside the borders of the United States. So we need to make sure that those markets are open to us so we can create jobs all over the country, but especially here in southwestern Ohio.
Yeah, I've spoken to leaders at Procter & Gamble and at GE, but also farmers who are truly concerned about these tariffs and this trade policy. Listen, we've got to start fighting for American workers and American jobs. We can't do that by dictating trade policy through angry tweets. And because of the way that this trade policy and these tariffs have been imposed, we've really got a lot of Ohio manufacturers, small businesses, and farmers who are truly concerned. Last year alone, our exports from Ohio to China was $3 billion. This is absolutely a problem for our state economy and for our national economy. But I think we have to understand how we got here in the first place. We have to look at the fact that we gave China permanent normalized trade relations, which means that we no longer look at the agreements we make with the Chinese companies and businesses to make sure that American workers and American jobs are being treated fairly. How did we do that? Well, Mr. Chabot was in Congress and supported that. We allowed China into the WTO. Again, Mr. Chabot was in Congress and supported that. And Mr. Chabot's done nothing to stand up to the Chinese as they've manipulated their currency over the past several years. It's another example of how we need genuine new leadership to stand up for our farmers, for our large corporations, for our manufacturers, and for our small businesses.
He's just wrong about Chabot not doing anything on trade. I've been one of the biggest proponents of trade, of work with Rob Portman, for example, who is our U.S. trade representative. And we've worked on a whole range of trade issues over the year. But let me just follow up on one other thing that he said before, since I've already covered trade. He talked about we're the ones running a negative campaign and all that kind of stuff. I think it's important that the person who's representing us, you can actually trust them. This is unfortunately a guy you can't trust. We have a difference on one particular issue, on the life issue. I'm pro-life. He's pro-abortion. Not only pro-abortion, but pro-partial birth abortion.
Thank you, Mr. Chabot. We need to move on.
I'll get to it on a later question.
Okay, Kristen Swill, your question, please.
Mr. Pureval, the Tri-State has several major infrastructure concerns, including the Brent Spence Bridge and, as you've mentioned, the Western Hills Viaduct, which are both in disrepair. How should funding to address these crumbling structures be secured?
This is another example of how we need a genuine leader in Washington to fight for our infrastructure. The Western Hills Viaduct is literally raining concrete, and the Brent Spence Bridge is likely or liably to fall into the river sometime into the future. And because we haven't had strong leadership in Washington, we haven't secured the funding necessary to improve these infrastructure projects. The Western Hills Viaduct for the past 12 years has been found to be structurally unsound. And Mr. Chabot has had an opportunity. He's had an opportunity since 1994 to do anything about it. And unfortunately, instead of working for the people of the First District, he's been pointing fingers and blaming others. First and foremost, what I'll do is get on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee to have a strong voice to drive a lot of those tax dollars that we're sending to Washington, D.C. back to our community. We only get 52 cents on the dollar for all of our tax dollars. And I think we can do better there. Instead of being on the Foreign Affairs Committee, flying all over the world, racking up frequent flyer points, I'll be in D.C. on the Infrastructure and Transportation Committee fighting for you. The other thing I'd like to do is work hard with our local and state leaders to apply for federal funds through Tiger grants. Just this past year, our local leaders, including Mayor John Cranley, applied for those grants for the Western Hills Viaduct and other important infrastructure projects. And unfortunately, Mr. Shabbat's signature was not on those applications. I'll be a true partner for our local leaders on these issues.
He's absolutely wrong about Mr. Shabbat's fingers not being on there. Absolutely was. We work with the city on that, as we always do. I'm committed to making sure that the city gets its fair share of federal dollars. Have in the past, will continue to do it in the future, and have worked on the Western Hills Viaduct. And he talks about it. I sometimes wonder if a chunk of the Western Hills Viaduct he talked about didn't hit him in the head. He's been so wrong on the Western Hills Viaduct issues time and time again. What he thinks that it's a federal office holder's power to go tell the local folks, here's what your priorities ought to be. That's not the way it works. He ought to know that. But he only moved into the district the day before he announced for Congress. So he's not prepared for this job. That's the bottom line. The way it works is the local folks determine what their priorities are, and then they bring it to the federal officials, and we work like heck to try to get what it is that they want. And that's what we've been doing on the Western Hills Viaduct. And since we're in Pricel, I'll mention another one. He's probably never even heard of this thing, but the Waldvogel Viaduct. We worked for years. I got $16 million. When you go across the 6th Street Viaduct, that's what it is. We got the money for that. We got the money for the I-71 and I-74 corridors, the improvements. We got the money for the Fort Washington Way, the riverfront parks. I could go on and on and on. He doesn't know these things. Why? Because he didn't live here. Okay, he just started running for Congress and wasn't nearly prepared, and that's very unfortunate. The bottom line is we're going to get the Western Hills Viaduct done. We just got $5 million. We think there's another $10 million in the pipeline. We just brought the Secretary of Transportation, Elaine Chao, into the district. We're going to get this done and a whole lot of other projects for this community.
I'm glad to hear that Mr. Shabbat is starting to prioritize the Western Hills Viaduct, bringing in Secretary Chao. It's taken him over 2 decades, but I guess the people of the 1st Congressional District should be relieved that he finally realizes that it's a problem. Mr. Shabbat, I can't believe you would make a joke about the Western Hills Viaduct literally crumbling. A huge piece of concrete dropped on one of your constituents and nearly killed them. But the fact that you think the Western Hills Viaduct is a joke is probably an answer as to why you haven't lifted a finger to solve that problem. And Mr. Shabbat, I live in the district. I live downtown. But I guess you can be forgiven for not knowing that since you're flying all over the world and you probably don't know what the boundaries of your district are.
Thank you, Mr. Pureval. And back to Paula Christian.
Many parts of the 1st District are ground zero for heroin addiction. Issue 1 could change Ohio law to keep low-level drug offenders out of prison and promote more addiction treatment. Do you support Issue 1?
I do support Issue 1, and it's interesting you'd ask that question. I just asked my opponent about that in the race because he hadn't come out. There were 3 elected officials. He's actually one of 4 of the county law enforcement officials. You might not think that is clerk of courts, but he is. Our county sheriff, who is a Democrat, came out in favor of Issue 1 strongly. Our county prosecutor, who's a Republican, and our county coroner, who's a Democrat. All 3 of them came out. Mr. Pureval was absent. They'd just come out like the day before, so I asked him, I said, Mr. Pureval, these others, where are you? He ignored the question. Maybe he'll come out tonight because now he's on the spot and tell us about that, but I'm against Issue 1. It would be bad. It would weaken the drug laws here, and that's why all our law enforcement folks are against Issue 1. I've been in the forefront of the fight against the opioid addiction. I'm the dean of the Ohio delegation, and I brought in the director of the Office of Drug Control Management, brought all the members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats from Ohio, together when the opioid crisis was starting to take off to see what can we do about it. We worked in a bipartisan manner and passed CARA, which is a Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act. It's a whole lot of money for local communities and to make sure that we're battling this. We haven't won the battle yet, and we got a long way to go. Then we just passed additional legislation called the Support Act, which will continue to move in the direction of solving this because it hurts so many families here and all over this nation.
I'm confused by Mr. Shabbat's answer. He started by saying that he supported Issue 1, then he said later on that he didn't support Issue 1. If anyone's confused about this issue, it's you, Mr. Shabbat. Listen, I'm a former federal prosecutor. I served with our local law enforcement for a year, keeping our community safe. There's nothing that I take more seriously than public safety. I've got some concerns about Issue 1. Number one, it seems to tie judges' hands when it comes to sentencing. It also seems to relieve sentences for those who probably should be in jail. And finally, it's a constitutional amendment rather than going through the traditional legislative process. But I agree with the broader goals of Issue 1, that we need justice reform desperately. We're not going to jail our way out of the drug crisis. We unfortunately jail far too many low-level, non-violent drug offenders, and we need real justice reform to achieve that. But I'm not sure that the positives of Issue 1 outweigh the concerns, and I'm weighing the pros and cons. But what we do need is new leadership on the opioid epidemic. It's affected so many of our families. It's affected my own family. I understand the despair of a loved one trying to get help and not having the bed available to do so. We need to drive more resources to treatment and care. We need to stand up to the drug companies who've been culpable with this crisis for a very long time. Mr. Shabbat takes hundreds of thousands of dollars from drug companies, and so when this epidemic breaks out, he's nowhere to be found to hold them accountable.
Thank you. Do you want to rebuttal?
Yes, I would. If I misspoke on Issue 1, I'm opposed to Issue 1. My wife says I once in a while do that sort of thing. So if I did, I apologize. My opponent said, he's been saying this, that he was a federal prosecutor. He was basically an unpaid intern.
That's just not
what he was?
true.
Okay, well, we'll see.
Mr.
Shabbat,
No,
it's not your term, Mr.
attacks are just out of
These
control.
personal attacks. There's also a psychological term called projection, and that's what this guy did in the last debate. It's exactly what he's doing here. He has these deficiencies and problems he has. He projects them over on his opponent and says they're the one doing negative things.
Mr. Shabbat,
Thank you,
I wish you were less of
gentlemen.
a therapist and more of a
Your
congressman.
time's up,
Gentlemen,
Mr. Pureval.
both of your time is up. Let's move on to Tom McKee with our next question.
Thank you. Many of the commercials aired on your behalf, whether they are authorized by your campaign or presented by outside groups, make claims and statements that are borderline inaccurate or sometimes just outright false. This is a yes or no question, please. Do you believe personally everything that's in those commercials about your opponent? And if you don't, why are they airing?
Yes, I believe all of those issues in those advertisements are true. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can take independent, objective journalists' word for it. PolitiFact has said that Mr. Shabbat's campaign are misleading and outright lies. The Inquirer has said that, and I'm saying that as well. And what you've seen here tonight is just more of the same for Mr. Shabbat, a career politician desperately trying to hold on to his job and throwing out personal attack after personal attack. I served as a special assistant United States attorney for a year, working with our local law enforcement to prosecute federal crimes. I've done a lot of public service through the clerk of court's office, reducing the size of government and saving taxpayers nearly $1 million. I just don't genuinely believe that Mr. Shabbat has done very much for our congressional district. But what's worse than that is his voting record of taking health care away from 35,000 people in our district, of voting to strip protections for pre-existing conditions that affect 305,000 people in our district. My ads are substantive. They're based on policies where Mr. Shabbat and I disagree. They're optimistic and they're forward-looking. Mr. Shabbat, on the other hand, is just running such an unrelentingly negative campaign because after 2 decades in Congress, we just have very little to show for his time there.
The answer, Tom, is yes. I do stand behind all the allegations that were made in any of the ads that we've run. He talks about PolitiFact as somebody that, PolitiFact came out. PolitiFact is the same. They tend to come out on Democrat side most of the time when they're doing these fact-check things. They also came out on Barack Obama's statement relative to if you like your health care, you can keep your health care. They found that to be the truth. Okay, that was there. And after they got beat up so much by all the other critics, they turned around and flipped there and said, no, it's not true. And they called that the biggest lie of the year, the same organization. So they were on both sides of that. You really can't believe that organization. And if you look at what the Enquirer has done, read some of the articles about this guy, the one today. And they've turned on him completely because they've seen what a sleazy campaign he's running. And he talked about it. He's a wannabe career politician. That's what he is. And he throws out these attacks. Again, he said, I voted to get rid of health care for 35,000 Americans, strip them of their health care. Here's what that's about. Yes, I voted to repeal Obamacare because I said I would do that. And I voted to replace Obamacare with the American Health Care Act, which didn't become law because John McCain famously put his thumb down. They both had pre-existing conditions. I'm for pre-existing conditions. That 35,000 he's talking about, we gave people the choice. We're not going to take away and fine them or take away their income taxes if they don't get that health care. It's their choice. It's their choice. So it's not stripping anybody.
He's not for protecting pre-existing conditions. He can lie and say that he is, but his voting record says differently. He voted 3 times to strip protections for those pre-existing conditions. I say so. PolitiFact says so. The Inquirer says so. Unfortunately, Mr. Chabot can't run for from his record. He calls me a wannabe career politician. I mean, that's ridiculous. Mr. Chabot's been running for office for 40 years. That's literally longer than I have been alive.
And for our next question, Kristen Swilley.
Mr. Chabot, in your opinion, can anyone serve in U.S. Congress, or should there be a threshold of minimum elected experience, or conversely, an age or term limit?
I think our founding fathers got it right. You have to be at least 25 years of age to be a member of the House, 30 to be a member of the Senate, or 35 to be president. You have to be a resident of your state. You do not have to be a resident of your district. Now, politically, that can be tough. That's why Mr. Pureval had a decision. Was he going to run from outside the district, or would he move into the district? Well, he moved into the district the day before he announced that he was going to represent us. And he said, he again said, oh, he's been there 40 years. He likes to say, I haven't done anything. I think that's kind of an insult to the voters. The voters have looked at me and they've looked at my opponents for a long time, both at city council and at the county commission, and in 11 elections in Congress, 12 because I lost one of them. Steve Driehaus beat me once. I beat him the second time, but he got me the first time. And I've had some pretty good opposition. Our mayor of Cincinnati, John Cranley, ran against me twice. Roxanne Qualls, a great candidate, she ran against me. I've had a whole bunch. I ran against David Mann. That's who I beat to win the district. So a lot of good people. They looked at my record. They looked at what I promised to do and what I'd done previous to that, and they felt I was superior at that election to their opponent. My opponent must think that the voters of our district, aren't very intelligent or something. I think we got the best voters in our district of any district, of the 435 district, but because they've reelected me, and I think they're going to do so again. So quit insulting our voters.
Mr. Chabot, I trust our voters. I celebrate our voters. That's why I'm confident you're going to lose in November. But I want to touch on a few things that Mr. Chabot has just been blindly attacking me on. Not living in the district. As I've said, I live in the district. I attended law school here in the district. I served as a special assistant United States attorney here in the district. I worked as an attorney for Procter & Gamble here in the district. And as the Hamilton County Clerk of Courts, I currently represent 80% of the district. The people of the 1st District know me. They know my track record of making promises and keeping those promises, of modernizing government. And they know your record, Mr. Chabot, of being there for a very long time and not really doing very much for the people of the 1st Congressional District. The question was about term limits, and I think we do need term limits. In fact, when Mr. Chabot was first starting to run for office, he believed we needed term limits too. But unfortunately, he broke that promise and broke that commitment because he's been in Congress, as he mentioned earlier, for 22 years. But I think trust is important. We have to trust our elected leaders. Mr. Chabot has made promises and broken those promises. And unfortunately, his experience of taking health care away from people, of voting to continue to rig the economy against the middle class, that's the experience that we don't need. What we need is a new generation of leadership that's going to stop with the cynical and negative politics and start driving results for the people of the 1st District.
Mr. Pureval has this lofty language, this new generation of leadership, but is it a new generation of leadership to be under the kind of investigation that you are, to literally be hiding from the press? At the debate last week, there were 4 of us in the 2nd Congressional District, Brad Wenstrup and his opponent, all 4 of us were there, and then we went down for the press, a press scrum, and they asked us whatever we wanted to. Mr. Pureval refused to show up because the press might ask him some tough questions. He's afraid he's going to go to jail. And it's a good question. Can you serve in Congress from jail? There are a few members that have had to look at that in the past.
Paula?
5 people were shot when a gunman opened fire at the Fifth Third Center last month. Do you think there should be any new gun restrictions to deal with the epidemic of mass shootings?
Absolutely. We are confronted with the question as citizens of the 1st Congressional District and as of Americans. Is there anything that we can do to both respect the Second Amendment and also end or at least mitigate the unimaginable gun violence that's in our schools and in our communities, on our streets, and our public places? And I think the answer is yes. A majority of Americans believe we need to ban high-capacity magazines. A majority of Americans believe we need to ban bump stocks, that we need true universal background checks to make sure that dangerous criminals don't get their hands on weapons. And yes, that we need to ban military-style assault weapons. They're not used for killing people, or excuse me, they're not used for hunting or for self-defense. They're just used for killing people. But we have leaders in Congress like Mr. Shabbat, who after Columbine did nothing, after Sandy Hook and Parkland, after our own tragedy here in Cincinnati, have done nothing to keep us safer. And the answer as to why is because Mr. Shabbat is a lackey for the gun lobby. He takes hundreds of thousands of dollars from the gun lobby. So after these tragedies, his answer isn't coming together for sensible gun reform or trying to make sure that we invest in mental health or trying to make sure that our police officers have the right reporting to other law enforcement agencies around the country. His answer is more guns in our schools, utterly abdicating the idea that our schools should be safe places where our children can learn. This is an issue where we just disagree.
We certainly do disagree. And again, remember, Mr. Pureval is talking about running this positive campaign. He just called me a lackey. I've never called anybody a lackey in my life. Let's try to bring this to a little better level, if you wouldn't
That's
mind.
That's ridiculous.
Oh, it's ridiculous. Okay. All right.
Truly
All right.
ridiculous.
Let's talk about the issue.
You said earlier that I was lobbying for terrorists, Mr. Shabbat.
Okay. Are you finished? My turn. Thank you very much. It's an important issue, and it's trying to keep the American public safe, public safety issues. I was actually just down last night at the FOP, who endorsed me, by the way. If you want to know what the local police think about law enforcement, I'm the one endorsed by the police, not Mr. Pureval. I was down there last night, presented flags flown over the Capitol building to the 4 police officers who bravely put their lives on the line for the rest of us and took out that shooter down there on Fountain Square at the Fifth Third Bank building to honor them. I do not believe, and I've studied this for a long time, I'm on the Judiciary Committee, I've debated this, I've heard all the arguments about it. I don't think we will make ourselves any safer if we just pass new gun control legislation. I think we do need to enforce the existing laws that we have. After the Parkland shooting, I got together with Dan Hills. We just put forward, I'm almost out of time, legislation which passed. It's the law of the land. There's more money to harden the schools all over the country, including here in Cincinnati.
So I didn't hear any solutions on how we're going to end the epidemic of gun violence, but that has characterized Mr. Shabbat's time in Congress. No solutions, just time there, voting for pay raises, traveling the world, going around the country on the taxpayer's dime, 76 trips, costing $250,000. We need an actual leader in our district who's going to fight for us on sensible gun reform and on issues across our district.
Tom?
There is a showdown possibly looming on the Mexico border with the United States because of people coming to the United States or trying to come to the U.S. from Guatemala, Honduras. President Trump has said that he would authorize the use of the military to handle this situation. Is this the right approach to handling immigrants?
The so-called caravan that's heading for the United States is, I think, a danger to our country. We have the right to be a sovereign nation. We should not have thousands and thousands of people who decide they're going to come into our country, really literally break into our country. I think it shows one of the reasons a lot of Americans, including the President, including myself, thinks that part of the solution is actually to have a wall that people won't be able to breach as easily as the one right now. We saw what happened when Mexico tried to keep these. They just knocked the fences over and came in brute force. We ought to decide who comes into this country. We're a sovereign nation. My opponent hit me back on so many things just a minute ago. On travel, I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee. It's my job. We have members from the other entities here that we meet with. There are so many trade decisions back and forth. It's in our nation's interest. It's my responsibility to do that. I go to places like Iraq and Afghanistan and Yemen. My opponent was working. He ran an ad, and he said everywhere he'd been except for the 4 years where he worked for this big lobbying firm in Washington, D.C. They represent the worst of the worst. While I'm out in a country advocating human rights, his firm was advocating the worst of the worst. Terrorists, literally, the countries that were aligned with the terrorists against U.S. citizens that had been harmed or killed in terrorist activity.
Wow, Mr. Shabbat is just going lower and lower and lower with every opportunity. This kind of dog whistle politics, he's already been admonished for by the Inquirer and by national publications. But I guess he wants to win at any cost. It doesn't matter the kind of rhetoric and the kind of divisive language that he's using. It's just so unfortunate. I've never been a lobbyist. Never. It's just simply not true. Mr. Shabbat is lying about that. I worked as an antitrust litigator for a law firm, and I did that for 4 years. But Mr. Shabbat over and over again is just lying and telling untruths. But we, I guess, shouldn't be surprised because he's under federal investigation for handing out campaign contributions for personal use, $170,000 to his son-in-law. He's under Ohio investigation for taking public resources and using them for his campaign. His office is a revolving door of staffers to lobbyists. When he lost in 2008, he paid his staff $50,000 worth of bonuses before he left. If anyone on the stage has an ethics issue, it's Mr. Shabbat, unfortunately.
What you have just heard is a pathetic way to divert attention from the true improprieties, illegalities that he and his campaign have actually foisted on our community. And he hits with so many things which have so little substance, it's hard to even respond to all of them. So just let me say this. I think the people of this community know me. They know that they can trust me. They don't know a lot about you, but what we found out, you talk about being admonished. Just look what the Enquire's done the last couple of weeks with you.
Thank you, Mr. Shabbat. Kristen.
How often should a member of Congress hold town halls in his or her district? If elected, how will you work to address the needs of your constituents on the ground outside of campaign season?
Yeah. As a member of Congress, you should be holding town halls regularly to understand what's going on the ground in your community, to hear from your constituents, hear their insecurities, their fears, their challenges, so you can be a better member of Congress. Mr. Shabbat, unfortunately, hasn't taken that to heart. He hasn't had a real town hall, in-person town hall, in nearly 6 years. He's been busy flying around the world. I think he's been to Taiwan more than he's been to Mason. I'm not sure he's ever held a town hall in Warren County. So it's no wonder that Mr. Shabbat just has a very thin track record of accomplishments, because the people of the 1st Congressional District don't know where he is on health care, on infrastructure, on the economy. We just recently had an NAACP forum where we were talking about critical issues that are important to our African-American community. I showed up and Mr. Shabbat didn't. But that's consistent with how he's been in Washington, D.C., more interested in taking these trips and voting for pay raises, more interested in handing out campaign contributions to his family members than actually representing the district. In Congress, I promise to be accessible, to be in your town halls, to be in your parades and at your festivals, because it's the #1 priority for me to understand what's going on in your lives. Mr. Shabbat has had his chance to do that, and he's just failed.
When you hear what he's saying, just remember how he talked about running this positive campaign and has blamed me for virtually everything. I think keeping in touch with the people you represent is one of the most important parts of your job. That's one reason the people of this district have reelected me time and time again. We held many, many town halls in person over many times. We would send out, it's pretty expensive, with your tax dollars, to get people to come to town hall meetings. And most members of Congress a few years back switched over to telephone town hall meetings. And we can get far more people, thousands and thousands of people on the line, and people get to ask questions. They don't have to leave their homes. They save on gas money. And so that's the way we've been doing them for the last few years. We may change at some point, but right now that works. They're trying to make this big issue. They're doing this against Republicans all over the country. The talking points that you're hearing tonight are basically out of the DCCC, Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee playbook. Here's the way you slime your opponents, and then you accuse your opponent of sliming you. That's what they do. It's very important for us to keep in touch with the folks that I represent. That's why they do it. And I intend to continue to do telephone town hall meetings, and I've probably got more positive feedback from folks on the street and everywhere else on that than almost anything that I've done, other than maybe when I beat you. I'll get a lot of congratulations on that.
Yeah, that's a low bar, having a teletown hall as your main accomplishment, getting a lot of positive feedback from that. In Congress, I hope to get positive feedback from saving your health care, for saving you taxpayer dollars, for actually fighting for you to keep good-paying jobs here in the 1st Congressional District. Mr. Shabbat and I have a very different barometer for success. Like last time we debated, Mr. Shabbat has been consistently just losing his temper and being angry about being blamed for his lack of leadership. In the face of this blame, he seems to be pointing at other people, blaming others. Well, Mr. Shabbat, it's time for you to hold some responsibility and look in the mirror.
Thank you. Our next question is from Paula.
This congressional seat is considered crucial to Republicans retaining control of the U.S. House. What does the future hold for this region and this nation if Republicans keep control? And what would it look like if Democrats won control?
Well, I think we want to continue the progress that we have started under President Trump and a Republican Congress. One of the principal things we did was to pass the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which has energized this economy tremendously. It wasn't just that, though. It's also reducing the regulations that were like a wet blanket over the economy, especially small business. And I mentioned before that I'm the chairman of the Small Business Committee in Congress. About 70% of the new jobs created in America are created by small businesses. And so those two things together, the tax cuts, reducing the regulations, have energized this economy like we haven't seen in years. Unemployment rates have come down dramatically. We're down at about 3.7%, which is the lowest we've had in about half a century. And among African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, it's historically low. There haven't been times where folks were employed more than they are right now. So we're heading in the right direction. So your second part of the question, what would happen if the Democrats took over? Well, there's some real differences between the two of us. One thing, I'm for cutting taxes. Mr. Pureval agrees with Nancy Pelosi that we need to raise your taxes.
It's not true.
It's absolutely true. And he also came out, and this came out in the last debate, he is opposed to making the middle-class tax cuts permanent. He thinks Obamacare is good enough. I think the American people deserve better. So I think it makes a real difference which party's in control after November 6th.
I don't know where to begin with that. Mr. Shabbat, again, just is committed to telling these untruths. I'm just opposed to this tax bill. I've said that consistently. What I'm for is middle-class, working family, and small business tax cuts. That's not what happened here. What happened here is the rich people of our country got way too much, and the middle class got way too little. The facts are that 83% of the benefits from this tax cut goes to the richest 1% in our country. And it blows a nearly $1.9 trillion hole in the deficit. After it's fully implemented, 92 million American families' taxes will actually go up. And that deficit is important because since Mr. Shabbat's been in office, the deficit has gone up $15 trillion. Just his last term in Congress, he's added another $2 trillion to the deficit. He used to have a deficit calculator on his website, but he took it down because apparently his votes broke it. But it's important to understand that in order to fill that hole for the deficit, the leader of his party, Mitch McConnell, has said that they're going to go after Social Security and Medicare, asking senior citizens to pay for a tax break for billionaires and millionaires. But it's consistent with his position on Social Security. He's on record saying he's in favor of privatizing Social Security. He voted to raise the age to 70, and he supported an age tax which increased the cost of medicine for those over 55. In Congress, I will fight to protect Social Security, not cut it like my opponent.
I've never voted to cut Social Security, never would. Medicare, same thing, never would. He talks about the deficit, which is big and needs to be dealt with seriously. There's a group called Citizens Against Government Waste. I've either been the highest or one of the highest in the entire Congress for voting against wasteful spending. The record speaks for itself. And as far as accusing, he keeps saying I'm lying. If you want to talk about somebody lying, talk to some of the people at the church festivals. He's pro-abortion, pro-partial birth abortion. He goes and tells these people there he's pro-life at Catholic church festivals here on the West Side. It is true. I've had dozens of people come and tell me that about you.
That is not true.
Okay, believe those people or believe this gentleman here. One of them's lying.
Let's move on to Tom McKee's question.
Tanya, thank you. Tell me something specific that you've done in the last 7 days that proves to the voters of the 1st District that you're out for their needs, but not your own personal agenda or something of a corporation or something of a donor.
Well, first and foremost, I have not and will not take any corporate PAC money. The donations that I'm receiving are from individuals who are passionate about changing our economy, changing our healthcare system, making our country better for all of us. Mr. Shabbat can't say the same thing. He's taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from big drug companies, hundreds of thousands of dollars from oil companies, millions of dollars from special interests. So when drug prices goes up, he doesn't say a word. When the cost of fuel goes up, he doesn't say a word, because he's bought and paid for by special interests and by deep-pocketed donors. He takes a lot of money from them, and he gives them a lot of money. In this most recent tax bill, these folks, these special interests, have received $30 billion. That's the kind of status quo politics that we have to change. The corrupting influence of special interest money is in all of these issues. And Mr. Shabbat is all too willing to take their money hand over fist and then vote for their interests, even when it hurts the people of the 1st Congressional District. That's why, despite the fact that this district was drawn to elect Mr. Shabbat, Republicans and Democrats are lining up behind our campaign because they're interested in something better. They're interested in someone who's actually going to fight for them and not for the special interests.
As far as doing something for the people of this district, my job is to work for the people of this congressional district. And again, my opponent has said, he keeps saying this, oh, he hadn't done anything here in all the time that he's been in Congress, whether it's 22 years or 40 years or whatever number he uses in the next time. That's an insult to the seniors that we helped just this week. Prior to that, we have seniors who come all the time, and they are having trouble with their Social Security or having trouble with their Medicare or sometimes Medicaid. We work with them. If it's a more challenging case, I'll take it up with my staff and the person. We do this all the time to deal with the problems they have with the federal government. That's my job. With our veterans, that's another thing. He's been there not long, he hadn't done anything. It's doing something when you're helping the veterans. That's our responsibility. And we help them with their disability, their pensions, with what they've earned by being a veteran, wearing the uniform of the country. We have people that come in are having trouble with the IRS. That can be a very scary experience. You got the full power of the federal government after you. Those are the kinds of things that I do every single day. They're not the glory stuff. This is a glory guy over here. I mean, he's got a great smile. He's a handsome guy, and that's just all great and everything. But this is a nuts and bolts job. There are workhorses and there are show horses, and I don't think it's too hard to say which one he is and which one I am.
I wish you were a workhorse, sir, but that's just not the truth. He didn't mention anything, frankly, to warrant him being reelected to the Congress, because he's frankly wrong on all the big issues that are facing our district. He says it's an insult to the seniors. Well, an insult to the seniors is your votes to cut Social Security protections, your support for privatizing it. He talks about the veterans, but he hasn't done anything about the VA and the incredible harm that our veterans are going through trying to just get treatment for what ails them after returning from the battlefield. He hasn't done anything for those communities, and that's why so many of them are supporting me.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. This will be our last question, and Kristen Swilley has the honor of asking it.
Sure. Where do you stand on the Me Too movement, particularly in light of the manner in which the Kavanaugh nomination and hearings were handled? Do you believe the woman who accused him of sexual misconduct?
I didn't hear the last part of the question.
My apologies. Do you believe the woman who accused Brett Kavanaugh of sexual misconduct?
I think both Brett Kavanaugh and Dr. Ford were very credible people. And I do think that both Gorsuch and Kavanaugh were first-rate picks. I think they were both eminently qualified. But this was, I think, the system, and virtually every American, whichever side you were on, saw this, is the way this was handled did a disservice to the country. And I think particularly Senator Feinstein, either her or her staff, the allegations should have been handled early on in the process. This came in at the 11th hour. We have to take every allegation of sexual misconduct seriously, and they should have investigated. And I think Senator Flake did the right thing when he convinced them to delay this for a week so they could have the FBI do another investigation, and they did an investigation. But we should always make sure that if an allegation is made, it's taken seriously. I'm hoping that that he's going to be a great member of the Supreme Court. One of the things that concerns me, however, is that my counterpart on the Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler, who, if the Democrats win, he'll be the chairman next time. If he doesn't, he'll be the ranking member, and I may be the chairman next time. We'll see. But he's talking about now opening up investigations and trying to impeach Kavanaugh. And Nancy Pelosi and a whole bunch of her cohorts up there are saying they also want to impeach the President of the United States. I don't think that'd be good for the country.
Mr. Pureval?
Yeah, I believe what transpired through Judge Kavanaugh's confirmation was emblematic of a dysfunctional and toxic Washington, D.C. And what it's leading to is a mistrust in our democratic institutions, our institutions like the Supreme Court, which is so critically important that we uphold the value of that court and that we make sure that it's not seen as a political arm of frankly, either party. And unfortunately, what we saw through the Kavanaugh confirmation is more of the same, of both parties pointing fingers and of frankly tearing our country apart. That's why we need new leaders to come in to drive results for the district and put partisanship and tribalism aside. Regarding the Me Too movement, it's been inspiring to see women and girls coming forward, making their truth known, talking about the abuse that they've unfortunately experienced. Their bravery inspires us all. And I think we have to do more to empower these women, to believe them, to protect them from the unfortunate name-calling and threats that ensue. We need leaders who understand those issues. We need leaders who will stand up for women, for pay equity, stand up for women when they're trying to get access to quality, affordable health care. Again, Mr. Shabbat and I just disagree on this. He voted to strip protections that are important, pre-existing condition protections that are important to women, like childbirth and breast cancer. We just disagree on those issues.
He has spread so much disinformation during the course of this campaign. I've already sort of addressed those issues, but let me address another one. And that's the Violence Against Women Act involved. Because he had the nerve to run an ad saying I'd voted against the Violence Against Women Act. And there he goes. You did. He said the same thing the last time. It's not true. Basically what happened is this. I have always been for the Violence Against Women Act, voted for it probably 10 times. Then when the Democrats controlled the Senate back in 2013, they decided to play politics, and they put a whole bunch of new visas for illegals to be covered in the bill. And so we voted for the House version. The Senate version is the one that ultimately passed. And that was a bad bill.
Thank you, Mr. Shabbat. Thank you, both of you, actually. We are now going to move on to closing statements. Gentlemen, you each have 2 minutes for your statements. And we begin with Mr. Shabbat.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for watching this debate this evening. You know, back in the day when I was still practicing law, I used to tell juries when opposing counsel went last that I wouldn't have an opportunity to speak after that. So I asked them to kind of imagine what my response might have been. I'd ask you to do that tonight because I won't get an opportunity if he hits me again on stuff to respond. I fought for you in Congress for 22 years now, always putting your interests first. My opponent worked for a Washington lobbying firm longer than he's lived in our congressional district, a firm that made its mic out. I think the mic just went out.
Apologies for that.
That's okay. So, for those folks at home, is it okay there?
Yep.
For 22 years now, I've had the opportunity to represent this district, and as I mentioned, my opponent worked for a Washington lobbying firm for longer than he's lived in our congressional district, a firm that made money and paid his salary, really blood money, from the world's worst dictators. And we know that he wants to impose those Washington values on our community. Even the Washington Post reported that AFTAB is the, quote, favorite of D.C. Democrats, Washington Democrats. It's no wonder that my opponent and I have some significant differences on the issues and that are important to you and me and our families. I'm for the middle-class tax relief. My opponent would vote with Nancy Pelosi to repeal those middle-class tax relief, and he was opposed to making them permanent. And last week, he denied it. There's a brochure that they filled out saying that that was his position. He hasn't responded to that publicly yet. It certainly hadn't been in the paper. I'm for secure borders, safety and security. My opponent supports Nancy Pelosi's immigration approach, open borders and sanctuary cities, making us less safe. I'm fighting for better, more affordable health care. He would join Nancy Pelosi and push nationalized health care that would bankrupt Medicare and double our taxes. As I have throughout my career, I'll stand with you, while Mr. Purival here will stand for himself and with Nancy Pelosi. I want to thank you all for listening here this evening. Thank you for the honor of representing you in Congress. I ask for your vote. God bless you all. God bless America.
I don't think I've ever heard someone say Nancy Pelosi's name more than 2 minutes. What he's trying to get you to do is to believe that he's been in Congress for 22 years and that he's accomplished anything. But that's not true. On Nancy Pelosi, I've said publicly over and over again, but that's not stopping him from misleading you, that I think we need a new generation of leadership on both sides of the aisle. I won't support Ms. Pelosi for Speaker on the floor or in the Congress. I've been very, very, very clear about that. But I want to get back to something a little more positive. I want to thank all of you for watching at home. I want to thank all of you in the audience here today. My favorite part about running for Congress is the time that I've spent with all of you in your neighborhoods, listening to the issues that you care about, learning about your fears and your hopes. Our communities are hardworking, resilient, brave, and kind. Nothing is given to us, but we like it that way. And what I've learned is whether you live in Mason or Avondale, whether you work at Procter & Gamble, or whether you're a teacher or a carpenter, we all want the same things. We all want access to good quality, affordable health care. We want good jobs, and we want a better future for our children than we had for ourselves. But we can't create change if we keep sending the same people to Congress. We need new leadership. Unfortunately, as you've seen here tonight, because of Mr. Shabbat's blind attacks, politics can be cynical and divisive. But it's important and special because it's that one opportunity to make a real impact on real people's lives. I understand that. So when I talk to people about their concern about losing their job or their concern about losing their health care, I know what I'm fighting for, and I'll never lose sight of that. My name is AFTAB Purival, and I asked for your vote because I believe in what we can achieve together, and I know our best days are ahead of us. Thank you.
And thank you both, gentlemen. We thank all of you for watching the Ohio 1st Congressional District debate. Our thanks to the Western Economic Council and the Warsaw Federal Incline Theater. All of this you can find on WCPO.com. And remember, Election Day is November 6th. Good night, everyone.